Yes, I know. Another Submariner homage? Bear with me though. This may just be the best one yet. I've had a fair number of sub homages since I started this hobby, so I was curious to see how this Sugess stacked up. I got my unit from the Seaman store on AliExpress. They usually have the best prices. There are 4 dial and bezel color combinations to choose from, and you can get them for around $150 during a sale. The watch comes in a pelican style case. If you've purchased watches from AliExpress, you probably already have a collection of these somewhere around your house. Besides the watch, you get a thick manual that you'll never read, a springboard tool, and a warranty card which is disappointingly unsigned. The case on here is the modern interpretation of the sub. These dimensions made it fit great on my 6.5 inch wrist. It definitely has a presence, but it doesn't feel too bulky or unwieldy. The case has a nicely brushed finish on the top of the lugs, and the sides of the case are polished. The edges and corners of the case are very well defined, but they're not sharp or uncomfortable, unlike the San Martin version I reviewed before. All in, this feels like a very well-built case. This watch has a fairly flat side profile, but there's a slightly downward curve at the lugs. The crown comes in at 6.8mm and it's flanked by 2 crown guards that protect it against bumps. It's a screw-down crown that helps it achieve the 200-meter water resistance rating. Screwing out the crown allows you to hand wind the watch. Pulling it out to the first position changes the date, and you can set the time in the last position. There's an additional gasket on the crown tube that you don't usually find on many watches. That's a really nice addition. The crown is polished and it has a laser engraved S that I'm not the biggest fan of. This watch has a 120 click unidirectional bezel. The bezel has a Lume pip that lines up at the 12 o'clock position and engraved hour markings. The markings here are not the usual white paint that you see on other brands. Sugess went with a silver paint, which makes it look more subtle and doesn't take that much attention away from the dial. It's a small change, but the difference it makes to the overall look is bigger than you might expect. I really like it. The bezel is quite easy to grip and turn. The clicks are defined and consistent, but the action does feel a bit light. Here's what it sounds like. Moving on to the crystal. It's a flat sapphire with that familiar cyclops above the date. The AR coating works fantastically to minimize reflections and give you a clear view of the dial. The dial has a glossy deep black finish that looks like a black hole is sucking all the light into it. The printing on the dial looks very crisp and well done. The indices are applied and have a polished finish. The hands are flat and polished across the entire length. The legibility of this dial is fantastic. You'll have no problem reading what time it is, except when the minute hand is hidden behind that cyclops. Looking at it on the macro, and here's where you'll start to see some inconsistencies. The hands have rough edges in certain areas, and there are some scratch marks on the polish indices. The rehaut on this has an Easter egg that only the wearer of this watch will notice. There's a shallow Sugess engraving all around it. This was a nice surprise. You don't really notice it 90% of the time. It's subtle, but it's there. The hands and indices are filled with Swiss BGW9 Lume. It's evenly applied, and it glows in a cool blue color. It doesn't have the same initial brightness I had on my Steel Dive SD1970, but that watch spoiled me, so I guess there's no point comparing this to it. I don't know why I just did. On its own, the lume on the Sugess is fantastic. The case back here is sterile, with a brush finish across the center. That's really all I can say about it. Powering this watch is the trusty Seiko NH35 automatic movement. It averaged around plus 5 seconds per day during my time with it. Editor Harvin here. So about 1 week after I recorded this review, I started having problems with the movement. Every time I tried to unscrew the crown, It started switching the date before it was fully unscrewed. I'm not sure if the issue was the movement or the crown stem, but it appeared out of nowhere and I just couldn't figure it out. I started a dispute with AliExpress and I managed to send the watch back for a refund. This could just be a problem with my unit, but I wanted to highlight it anyway. Back to the review. The bracelet is a 3-link oyster style with a drastic taper, going from 20mm at the lugs to 15mm at the clasp. The brushing is well done and matches the brushing on the case. It wears and feels very comfortably on wrist. The links are attached with screws that thread it in and out very smoothly. The end links are solid and fit the lugs perfectly. There's absolutely no play or gap on the end links. I don't usually like male end links because they extend the wingspan of the watch, but the male end links here are slightly more recessed. This is another subtle change that makes a huge difference to wearability, especially for those with smaller wrists. The clasp on this is entirely brushed. It has the Sugess logo on it, which lets you flip open the flip-lock mechanism. The clasp and extension are fully milled. The star of the show here though is the on-the-fly adjustment. It makes it extremely convenient to tighten or loosen the bracelet fit throughout the day. So what are some things I like and dislike about this watch? Let's start with the build quality. It's difficult to know how good a watch is built just from photos and videos. It's something we feel the moment we hold it in our hands. The moment I held this watch, I knew. The quality of materials are excellent, the tolerances are tight, and the finishing on the case and bracelet were all done to an extremely high standard. Next up, the on-the-fly adjustment. It's so convenient. I used it at least twice every day. First in the morning to loosen the fit, and again in the evening to tighten it up. Once you get the hang of it, you'll start wondering why all brands don't have this feature. Lastly, Cyclops magnification. I always prefer not to have a Cyclops, but if it's there, I expect it to work. The Cyclops on this Sugess actually does the job it's supposed to. It gives you a very clear, magnified view of the date. Now onto some things I disliked, starting with the bezel action. This was the one area of the watch that didn't feel as high quality as the rest. The bezel action was a bit too light for my taste, and there was some slight backplay between the positions. Next up, the rough finishing on the hands. I don't expect perfect macro level details at this price point, so I normally give this a pass. But because the entire dial was so clean and glossy, the rough finish on the hands did stand out a bit in certain lighting conditions, even without a macro lens. To wrap things up, what do I think about the Sugess? I reviewed the San Martin sub about a year ago, and at that time, I thought that was the king of all sub homages. The Sugess probably lays a strong claim to that title at this point in time. It's built in extremely high standard, and it punches well above its $150 price point. If the bezel action and hand finishing don't bother you, and if you don't get a lemon like I did, this could just be the last sub homage you'll ever need. But as you and I know, that's not how this hobby works.